one of the things that I am so impressed by and continue to be inspired by on a daily basis is the leave it better than we found it mentality of the entire women's sports community. And I think that that is something that cannot be lost.
Welcome back to The Deal. I'm Jason Kelly alongside Alex Rodriguez here in New York. We are so excited to have with us Laura Correnti, of course, the CEO and founder of Deep Blue Sports and Entertainment. Elsie, great to see you. You're a podcaster yourself, so you come ready to play, I know.
Always ready to play ball. If you stay ready, you don't have to get ready.
Exactly. So, you and I have known each other for a few years. As I got deeper and deeper into the sports world and the intersection of business, sports, and culture, and you've gone all in on women's sports, Deep Blue Sports and Entertainment. You've got a roster of incredible partners, sponsors, etc. I want to jump right in. What was the moment that you decided to go all in on women's sports?
Sure. Well, I think just for backstory and context, because this wasn't a bandwagon fan situation, really there was a pinnacle moment in 2019 when the U.S. women's national team won their fourth World Cup in France. And at the very end of that game, when they're hoisting the trophy, the crowd breaks out in a chant of equal pay instead of USA. And that was the same year that a number of players from the national team had sued their employer in U.S. soccer and won in achieving that equal pay status. And I remember very vividly sitting at the Jersey Shore, as one does, watching this match and seeing all the commentators and broadcasters and even the social media started to light up saying, we haven't seen this kind of momentum since 99. So now you're talking 20 years forward.
Right.
In terms of this level of excitement, enthusiasm, and support for this team. But it was really larger than the team. It was for the women's sports ecosystem at large. And in that moment, Jason, I go to the NWSL website, and if you scroll to the very bottom of that website in 2019, which I did on that day, which was July 7th, there were 4 partners to the league at that point. So Nike had the kits. Lifetime, the women's cable network, was the media rights distributor at that point. Thorne, the supplements company, and a lawn care service was the 4th. And as somebody who'd grown up in the advertising industry, predominantly as a media buyer, you know very well what makes this industry go round, right? And that's not just the media rights, it's also the advertisers who support it. And I knew in that moment, while appreciative of those advertisers and partners, knowing critical to just have a league in play, it was certainly not going to be enough to meet this moment. And so I started to dig in, and it really was a multi-year journey to realize that fast forward into 2023, when I decided to go full throttle, this wasn't a product issue. That team in particular had been dominant for decades. This wasn't for lack of storytelling. These athletes were so multidimensional and haven't had the opportunity to tell their stories on the field, let alone off of it. And as somebody who had been a buyer, I recognized in that moment, just as a microcosm example, women's sports, to get nerdy with it for a second, were being sold on the same currency and measured on the same metrics that men's sports were. And that was largely based on reach. And even in 2023, outside of these current broadcast deals that have just been negotiated, media rights deals, women's sports hadn't been mainstream, let alone put into an appointment viewing position, primetime positioning, et cetera, and so forth, in order to be sold, let alone transacted and measured on that same metric. And so you start to realize this is a systems issue. And leveraging 20 plus years in the ad business, coupled with having played through the collegiate level, paired these two skill sets and said, we're off to the races.
Yeah. And it's funny, too, because you do fast forward to 2025, and I'm sitting here in New York City alongside the owner and governor of the Minnesota Lynx, who I think it's fair to say, Alex, you have very quickly gotten religion around the economic power of women's sports. So tell me, how you come to it and sort of how you come to this conversation.
Well, I come from it, Laura, from a very humble and trying to really educate myself in the space, because it's like none that I've ever studied or seen. And just to give you an example, when you look at the Timberwolves and the Lynx, the crossover is single digits. It's somewhere on 8 or 9% on our fan base, which to me was like extraordinarily surprising. I would have probably handicapped it like probably 40 or 50%, but it's not. It's around 8 or 9%. But I guess, Laura, my question for you, as I'm in my early in my education journey with the WNBA, and I'm so excited about it with my partner, Mark Laurie. What should we be thinking about? And what are the people like Clara's a great example from the Liberty.
Clara Wusai.
Yeah, who's really the GOAT. I mean, she's really done incredible
Incredible.
things. What should we be thinking about? What are great owners like Clara doing?
Full disclosure, you're a huge Liberty fan.
I'm a women's sports fan, but as a Jersey girl, I support all of the local teams. So yes, I am a huge Liberty fan. But in order to see the industry succeed, the whole pie has to.
Yeah.
And just to answer your question, Alex, I think when you look at what a team like the Liberty has been able to achieve off the back of, and sorry to say this, their last championship where they defeated the Lynx, and the trajectory of advertisers and net new revenue they've been able to bring in, not just from ticket sales and merchandise, which are double, triple digit lift, but also just sponsorship deals. It's been fascinating to see when I started the business in 2023, fast forward 2025. I mean, we're not even 2 full years in yet at Deep Blue. The initial conversations were all just about recognition of the space. Now we're in an instance or a situation and chapter where we need to right size the business case. And so I'll give you an example, and I'll take us out of the W, but I think it's a pertinent one. Some data just came out around the NWSL's commercial sponsorship revenue in 2024, which achieved $75 million in ad revenue. That is up 16% from 2022. So growing, not exponentially in the ways we've seen some other numbers, but still double-digit lift. Yet when you look at those numbers, there is a glaring issue with respect to the annual average value of those partnerships. So $75 million came in across 441 partners. The reason I told you that story about when I looked into the league in 2019, we're up from 4 partners to 441 partners in that span. But if you divide those numbers, you're talking an average net value of $170,000. This is where I see the gap in terms of how do you start right sizing it. And so then you dig in and you start saying, okay, of that, 75 million, 3 clubs generated 46% of that: Angel City, the Current in Kansas City, and San Diego. So then you're like, okay, the average probably at the bottom half of that table, what are we really talking about? 5-figure deals? How do you grow at the rate in which the market is demanding? And so these are where I start talking about right sizing. And to do that, we've been really working on, okay, start making the business case in apples to apples scenarios. And when you start comparing it to men's. So you'll appreciate this, I think, particularly Alex. A 30-second spot in the MLB World Series over the last few years has averaged $450,000 to $550,000 per 30-second advertising spot. That means at $170,000, I can acquire the rights to work with a team for an 8-month plus season at the same rate I can buy at a quarter or an eighth in some instances what I'm buying a 30-second spot in the World Series. So you start to put those comparisons together. I mean, and then you get into things like, okay, a Super Bowl spot, last year alone was $7 to $8 million. You come into a league with a $7 to $8 million check, you can own the whole damn pie. So these are the sort of ROIs and comparisons, and we've been talking about getting in now. But I think this expression of focusing on how cheap it is, and I hate to use that word, but the entry point, as opposed to the ROI and what you can actually achieve in value at this stage of growth, is something that I think the market is missing.
And so tell us about some of the brands that are coming in. There are some household names that you've worked with, whether it's Ally Financial, Mass Mutual, others. But, I'm sure you look around the Target Center, Alex, and, I watch these games on TV, and you are starting to see really big names, come in. What's the case? As you're sort of cutting these deals, you are a very trusted intermediary between all of this, and you're making these deals happen. What's the case you're making that resonates the most to the potential sponsors?
I mean, it's just what we talked about, the value exchange in terms of the return you're going to get for the investment that you're putting in. And when you start, again, right-sizing in comparison to where these media buyers on behalf of brands or the brands themselves are investing their media and sponsorship dollars, you'd be hard-pressed to make a case where the WNBA, for example, last year in 2024, so an average of 13x on the investments brands made as league officials. I don't have to tell you guys at Bloomberg that type of return in an investment in 1 year is significant. And so, when you talk about an Ally Financial, Ally Financial was a first mover in the space. They came out into the market a couple years ago, what I think they don't get enough credit for, but a very bold, audacious, perhaps ahead of its time, but certainly a catalyst commitment, which was saying, we're going to initiate this 50-50 pledge. For every dollar we spend in men's sports, we're going to put into women's sports within a certain period of time, a real tangible, measurable goal. Well, they get into the space and they recognize there's not enough inventory to actually even meet their own goals. So now you start recognizing your role as an advertiser is not just to invest in the market. We actually have to create the market we need to invest in. And so I think Ally's done an incredible job of showing up in places like not just becoming league officials for the NWSL and the PA there, now a league official for the WNBA, showing up in places like Unrivaled, investing in niche media properties like Tobin Heath and Kristen Press's Re-Inc., investing into the whole ecosystem so
Hmm.
that there is enough for advertisers who need to achieve scale in many instances to justify the media investments they're making, to be able to come back and say, okay, I could put X in with X return, because many of them say this isn't charity. They're not doing this
Right.
as a check the box anymore. This is a really viable market, but the media ecosystem coupled with the team league athlete ecosystem has to mature in terms of its accessibility and availability of inventory for these advertisers to make the business case.
Laura, I want to just take it like one step deeper. We talked a little bit about the links,
Hmm.
but take someone like Nafisha Collier, who is a historic player who could
Hmm.
very well be the MVP this year. She's a great business entrepreneur. How should we be thinking about positioning her in the market? And do you position her parallel to the links or completely separate?
Oh, that's a yes and. I
Mhm.
think the value obviously she brings to your organization is like none other. You know, as you said, a legacy player who stands on her own. And at the same time, I think she demonstrates what is the best of women's sports, which probably has been one of the most undervalued, which she's a multi-hyphenate.
Yeah.
This is a woman who's an entrepreneur and starting Unrivaled, had the ambition and went out and created it, stood it up, proved the business model. You know, I just was reading the other day how they're expected to give increases to the players in Unrivaled in just year two for their salaries because they overachieved or hit every single metric that they set out to do in year one, which is not easy to do in sports, as we know. I love seeing the ads that she's in right now with care.com, emphasizing her role as a parent and a mom and bringing that dimensionality to the space. And so when I look at some of the stars of the W, I think, yes, we owe them more coverage with respect to their stats and score lines and all the incredible things they're doing on the court. But we also know there's a casual fan base out there that we've yet to even scratch the surface on, that isn't just coming to watch the W for the on court competition. They're coming because these are moms, these are fashion icons, these are entrepreneurs, they're recording artists. I mean, you could go down the list of all of the and ones that these athletes are and have had to do, largely because prior to the moment we're in, they didn't have a choice, right? Many of them had to be able to make ends meet, but whether playing overseas or starting businesses, just to be able to justify the means of being professional athletes.
Yeah. So let's talk about that multi hyphenate aspect because, I'm sitting next to one here. And part of the reason this show exists is because of Alex's own ambition. And I think the three of us all know that that's not a given for every athlete. Like it takes a special athlete to take it that extra step or those multiple extra steps. We've had several people, several of those multi hyphenates who've been on this show recently. Allison Felix, who I know is a recent business partner of yours, Sue Bird, who's a longtime business partner of hers. So help us understand that, and maybe start with Sue because I know you've been working with
Sure.
her for a long time. You know, again, she sat on set with us and sort of walked us through her journey. How did you guys get together, and what is it about her and your partnership that you can describe?
Sure. It was a very serendipitous opportunity for us to connect, which was around an industry event prior to launching Deep Blue. And as I was getting into the operational side of how we were going to make the business case to advertisers, I can come all day with the receipts of the things I've been able to develop in my career as a brand builder, an ad buyer, activation creator, et cetera. But there was a key piece that was missing, and I was noticing in every room I was going into was that first person athlete perspective. Now, in men's sports, it's relatively known because we have documentaries, we've heard the stories, we have the first person point of view and ongoing press conferences, pregame shows, postgame coverage, et cetera. Women's sports not the case. And so what I found to be interesting was when you would talk to advertisers and in some instances agencies in the year plus of, research and diligence we were doing prior to deciding to go all in. And I started recognizing, for example, you'd walk in to meet with a brand whose creative agency was developing the brief, the strategy, all the way through to execution of an ad campaign, for example, that was meant to either feature and or run in and around women's sports. The creators behind those ads, more often than not, had never watched a women's sports, let alone been to a women's sports game, experience, whatever the case may be. So, how can you authentically connect with an audience, let alone tell a story, if you haven't had that experience? And so, this perspective was one that was missing. And serendipitously got connected with Sue. This was on just on the heels of her retirement, obviously, an illustrious GOAT certified career. But also, this was not at the time, when basketball had taken off yet. It was this in between period, and we started talking about the work that she was doing, and I think it really piqued her curiosity to know not just the level of storytelling that goes out, but more importantly, if nobody sees the story, there's
Right.
no promotion or tune into the story, which was a side of the coin I was playing on. That story you're telling is a moot point. So this ability to have a hand and put her fingerprints, I think, on end to end was appealing. I will tell you, when we decided to link up, I announced the company in December of 23. I have great text receipts for a book someday of people telling me I was absolutely out of my mind. Lauren, nobody cares about women's sports. I mean, there are a lot of expletives in between. I announced Sue in January 24. Now, the sudden people stand up a little straighter. Wait a minute. We haven't seen this on the women's side the same way
Right.
we've seen, Alex, you and your peers linking up with entrepreneurs, business executives to launch and build companies. It was relatively not done. And fast forward April of 24, Caitlin Clark meets Angel Reese in that Final Four, and the rest was history. Not
Yeah.
only did Sue's time become very limited, she became very busy because obviously lightning in a bottle moment for her, which I'm so excited for and glad to see that she's gotten opportunities to weigh in on. But ever so more important to have her perspective as well as other athletes we work with at the table, talking to advertisers in a way that there's no amount of field research you can do when you want to put out an Olympic campaign spot focused around Team USA women's basketball and not have Sue Bird's opinion at the you can't compare these things.
You mean her five
So
gold medals?
yeah, not one, not two. I know you keep counting them. So yeah, I mean it's been a tremendous competitive advantage for Deep Blue, but also a tremendous competitive advantage for the market
Yeah.
to have athletes like Sue Bird and others who are assuming business positions and able to inform and just make the whole industry smarter about the true experience of what they've lived.
Laura, I love the space that you're navigating. And as a father to two teenage daughters, it really excites me that people like you that are so capable are really expanding the footprint of women's sports. A question about Deep Blue. You founded it 2 years ago. Have you
Mhm.
thought about your 5-year plan? And inside that 5-year plan, can you see Deep Blue being an NLP or a GP owner to a sports franchise?
So it's so funny, Alex. When we started the company, we had a 5-year plan, which went from 23 to LA 28. And we were going to look at that 5-year window up until the
Mhm.
Olympics in the US. I think within the first 6 months, I probably ripped that plan up 2 or 3 times because the market was just electric and the opportunities that were presenting itself were coming at a rate where like no plan on paper made sense because you just constantly having to hit the edit button. But the true nature of it 2 years in is recognizing that first of all, sports is not the output for me, it's the vehicle. And how do you thread and take this deep subject matter expertise at the intersection of media marketing, advertising, and women's sports to move horizontally, not just vertically? So, agency services, so to speak, was our Trojan horse in. Our primary customer was to work with brands to make them smarter, help them understand the space, right size the investments that they were making, and help extrapolate, incremental value. We've done that, as Jason alluded to, for some world class blue chip brands who are early and then some who have been net new. For example, I just brokered a deal just within the last few months between Vagisil and the New York Liberty talking about body confidence. They had never invested in the world of women's sports before. So a lot of net new comers as well. But as you pick your head up, I'd be remiss not to say, like, that's just the entry point. Things like IP development. This is something we're very excited about. We saw an opening for the lack of content creation. Less than 15% of coverage today still in the world of sports goes to women's sports. And that's where you start to sacrifice the storytelling that is missing. And so we decided to go all in with iHeart to develop iHeart Women's Sports, which in less than 2 years has over 16 original pods in the space covering a variety of sports from both former athletes, broadcasters, talent, et cetera. It's still to this day containing the only official women's daily podcast called Good Game with Sarah Spain, with a former ESPN broadcaster slash journalist. And so we started looking at the IP creation. Okay, what comes off of this? You start thinking about the world of commerce. You start thinking about live events. For 3 years running now, we've hosted the Business Women's Sports Summit in New York City in the spring, in an initiative that first started as like, if they build it, will they come? But it is a convening ground where it is the only space in the world, as far as we're aware, where the intersection of business and women's sports comes together. So you start creating all of these products and assets. So IP, live events, definitely interesting to us. Getting in and around the world of commerce, interesting to us. And then the last frontier is venture. We are learning so much in real time. I see a world where Deep Blue owns teams. I see a world where Deep Blue starts collecting assets and ultimately being the grounding center all through the lens of that subject matter expertise.
I want to go a little deeper on this ownership piece, though, Laura, because obviously very interesting to my partner here, this notion of ownership. And I do wonder how you see that developing, not just from the Deep Blue perspective, but in these conversations that you have with partners like Sue Bird, because ownership, and again, I'm sitting beside an example of it, the athlete to owner transition is becoming much better trod, for lack of a better term. How do you see that developing, and how does that play into your business model?
Sure. I mean, I think, again, it goes to a yes and. The strategic value of an Alex Rodriguez or a Sue Bird sitting in an ownership position to be able to provide a point of view that reflects the players, that reflects the training facilities, resource needs, to develop on-field excellence is paramount. There's no doubt about it. And I don't know how you can actually replicate that if you hadn't played it at that level. And also, one of the things that I'm seeing, especially in the world of women's sports, it is a gold rush, and there are a number of, investors of all kinds, family offices, all the way through to PE, venture, et cetera, coming in and around this space. We cannot apply the men's playbook to women's sports. Full stop. And I think there is, and Alex, I appreciate you saying this, a real need for education on who the audience is, really understanding the fan experience. Alex, I don't know if you've had a chance to go see a New York Liberty game. I haven't been to see the Lynx live. I've only seen them in Liberty. But this game day experience and the audience that it is super serving, there is nothing like it in sports, period. And if you can't understand the distinctions around that, I think you really handicap growth. A small microcosm and thinking about facilities and stadium development. This is an area I'm fascinated by. I was at a Washington Spirit match against Gotham in Washington, D.C. at Audi Field, and I actually took a picture of this moment. I was going up the escalator, and there was a whole section of stroller parking. It wasn't a formal official place. Now, there was a third-party vendor that was supporting that, sort of park and go. But when you start thinking about, mother rooms, having espresso martinis on tap, I mean, I could go down the list of things that when you start really thinking about the nuances and experience, how owners can get in and around the world of branding, media, marketing, influencers, creators, game day experience through experiential activation. We're no longer talking about a playbook we all know and grew up on. This is developing for a modern audience and a modern experience. And so I would encourage owners coming into this space to not be presumptive and really get in and under the hood, because I think the ability to derive incremental value by getting outside of the box of the thing we all know and love is only going to increase the valuations.
Laura, this reminds me a little bit, when you think about Deep Blue, it reminds me a little bit of, Bain Consulting and Mitt Romney. And Mitt was going to leave to start his own private equity group. And what they realized was, wait a minute, we're consulting, we have all the data, we bring all the value, we understand where the puck is going. Why are we going to let such a great talent like Mitt Romney go? Why not start Bain Capital? And then the birth of basically Bain Private Equity started. I mean, you're collecting all the data. You're in a position of strength. I can't think of anyone who could be a Dial or an Arctos, and you're well positioned in women's sports to bring tremendous amount of value.
No, I appreciate it. I actually was, before we got on this record, was reading about your new venture in Jump and the amount of capital that you've obviously raised there. Congratulations. And,
Thank you.
what I'm so enamored by is this full 360 where you own the data. This is another area when you get into the world of women's sports that has been such an impediment to growth. So just as a microcosm example, you look at, I'm a Gotham season ticket holder. Now, outside of the Kansas City Current, every women's sports team in the United States, regardless of sport, is renting or leasing their facility from a men's team or some other provider, right? They do not own the space. And I always think about it going through the turnstiles at Red Bull Arena, now Sports Illustrated Arena, how the trickle effect and what delays that can create for an organization when you don't have real-time access to who's coming through the turnstile, what they're buying at concessions, what the merchandise flow is, and not having that as a collective to then turn around. Alex, you're talking about as an owner and going out to advertisers. Advertisers want the data, and they don't want yesterday's, they want today's.
Yeah.
They want to be able to have real-time informed decision making. And so by creating a platform like Jump, from my understanding, it will have everything from ticket sales all the way through merchandising in one platform. This will help, in my opinion, to not only expedite deal flow, but also increase it. And I think that's something, again, as a media buyer for 20 years, I look at, clients want data. Brand marketers want data when I say clients. The women's sports industry largely has not had it. And I think that has been a tremendous disservice, and why we're seeing $170,000 deals, because you really have nothing to bet on. And everybody reports to somebody, right? And so at the end of the day, to make these decisions, you have to be able to justify this. And like I said, we're not in the checkbox era anymore. We need real tangible results.
One of the areas, Laura, that, you and I have talked about this, I think we actually talked about it on our panel at the Business of Women's Sports Summit, the media deal side, media rights, et cetera. I know you've looked at this intensely, and obviously a lot of that plays directly into what your clients want and expect, and what the leagues want, what the teams want. It plays into valuations, as Alex well knows. What happens next when it comes to media rights for the big women's sports?
This will be a hot take. I care less about the total number, more about the experience today.
Yeah.
And what I mean by that is seeing a number of leagues chase very, very high numbers, which again, I understand the reason, the business case, board of directors, needs for the leagues, et cetera. But in doing so, in often cases, we're fragmenting games across 4 or 5 plus networks. And you're taking audiences that are already nascent and still in their formative years. And I'm talking, high 6 figures, low 7 at best. And now you're splintering them across 5 networks. Women's sports suffers from 2 main issues. They're hard to find and they're hard to buy. We talked about the buying piece. I'll talk about the finding piece. It's been fascinating to see this, moment play out, because everybody's so excited by the multiples, but people not recognizing you're disrupting the audience experience. People don't know where to find half of these games. I mean, you need a master calendar that would stretch my dining room table just to understand what to do this weekend. I don't think that's a good service model for your fans. They're frustrated. You see them take it out in real time on social media. They're often helping each other figure out how to find it. And 2, you're creating, if you really think about it, in some instances, there are leagues with 5 distribution partners, which means you're creating 5 different rate cards for advertising, 5 different commercial products, 5 different game day experiences, and you're going to the same 5 advertisers asking them for the same 5 deals.
Right.
It doesn't work. And so this is a part where, I can understand why the MLB, the NFL, they have the luxury, right? You're talking tens of millions of people tuning in over how many decades. It's a fine-tuned machine. Women's sports is not there yet. And so when I look at those deals, I'm like, how do we streamline both the efficacy of finding it, but then you have to think about making it more efficient for advertisers to participate in it.
Laura, this is not a struggle or a challenge that is exclusively for WNBA or women's sports. I recently got a call from my mother, who's 89. Okay, that's a different demographic, but she still watches the Yankees game every night. I mean, that kind of puts her to bed, and she loves her Yankees. She's very frustrated right now.
They're hard to love right now.
She wants me to answer all the questions. I said, Mom, I don't have other. I'm not watching as closely as I am the Timberwolves and the Lynx. I'm sorry, but in one week, Laura, there was 6 different telecasts. We had a Yes Network, we had Apple TV, we had Gotham, we had Fox, we had Roku, and then we had ESPN Sunday Night Baseball. And Fox, of course, was Saturday. And my mom's like, where in the world do I find these apps? Can we go back to the old days and just turn on the Yes Network? And I said, no, Mom, those days are over. But that just gives you a little example of it's hard to find and hard to buy.
Right. And, it's interesting. I just saw literally a report that came out around if you want to be an NFL fan this year and watch the entire season, I forget how many there were. I believe it was something like $1,000 to $1,100 worth of subscriptions just to be able to watch the
Wow.
full season as a fan.
Wow.
Right.
Now, I love football, but I'm a Jets fan. So that's a big
Yeah.
commitment when you've been on the losing side
Sounds
for,
like you
for a
love
long
football and
time.
hate yourself if you're a
Uh,
Jets fan.
So, Laura, you a Jets and Mets? Is that usually how it works?
Jets, Yankees. This is
Oh, that's
unconventional. I
strange.
know. I blame my husband, but
So
he
it's
converted me to the
painful all
Jets.
the way around for you.
No, I mean, New Yorker fans are ride or die, but when you start talking about for, the average consumer, $1,100 worth of subscriptions, come on.
It's
And
untenable.
then you look at the women's sports space, it's not much far behind in terms of the amount of, if you want to be a W fan and an NWSL fan, I mean, how many platforms do you need? And
Right.
so I think this is where we're at a very interesting inflection point in media. The streamers are running up the scoreboard in terms of price and having the disposable cash to be able to put up these types of deals. But at some point, there has to be a convening of the powers that be that recognize you are fragmenting and diluting the value of your league.
I did mention something earlier that I wanted to sort of circle back on, which is the deal that you did with Always Alpha and Allison Felix, Always Alpha being the talent management um, company that she started. Help us understand sort of what you're doing there, because this notion of managing talent is a fascinating one. It's one you have a lot of windows into. It goes back to something, you've been talking about when it comes to, athletes like Alex, like Sue, and others who just have so much to offer. Tell us about that deal and sort of how it came about and what the vision is there.
I very vividly remember one of my colleagues calling me saying that they had heard some rumblings that another women's sports firm was coming into the space. Now, at this point, in the early 2024, we were still the only. I mean, now, obviously, the big talent agencies had women's sports services,
Sure.
but in terms of dedicated, no. And it was going to focus on talent. And there was this immediate rush of those inside the women's sports business bubble, which was and is still relatively niche, who immediately want to pit you against each other, right? They're like, there can only be one. But what was interesting was the skill set that we had and the business model we were running was complementary to what Allison and her business partners, Cassette and Wes, were after, in that they were going to hyper focus on managing the careers of female athletes exclusively. I was not in the business of managing anyone. We were
Yeah.
in the business of managing deal flow. And so when you looked at the opportunity, there were a couple things that I started thinking about. You control the money, you control the market. You have input and partnership with the athletes, you have the influence. So this became a really interesting proposition to me to say, hey, wait a minute, we already have a great vantage point into where all the money is flowing. But if we can now bolt on the influence and the incremental earned value of what these athletes can generate and how they are dictating the marketplace, you've cornered the market. It's lights out. And a series of conversations and meetings ensued, and got to talking about the unique nature of bringing these two, and at that point, only focus companies in the world of women's sports. And it was as simple as a handshake.
Yeah.
And the value exchange there in the joint venture that we created between Deep Blue and Always Alpha was going to manage the talent in all the ways that you would anticipate a talent management firm supporting its clients. And we were going to bring this added layer of strategic expertise and industry knowledge to help shape an athlete's platform to think about brand strategy. You can't just, I mean, Alex, I'd be curious to get your perspective on this. Like, we are no longer in the day of just playing the sport. I mean, there's very few people you're talking about just playing the sport. You have to be able to dimensionalize this. Female athletes times 10. And so to be able to provide that level of insight, knowledge, expertise of what we were seeing in the market, while also developing that as athletes as IP, now all of a sudden you have a tremendous competitive advantage, because it's not about transaction anymore. It's about transformation.
Yeah.
And we were very focused on working with the athletes to say, this moment that you're in your playing career, because they're predominantly working with a lot of active athletes, Let this be the vehicle. This is not the end game. And so as early as we can start getting in and thinking about, yes, you may be a Peloton instructor crushing the leaderboard or, world-class, runner who's out there breaking records. How are we using this moment and this platform, both the world and what it's providing us in coverage, also your social channels, how you're showing up in the market, et cetera, to start to build the tentacles and what will become your multi-hyphenate business. So that added component helps to supercharge and I think pay off on what you even asked earlier on what owners can do. It's bringing that level of strategy
Yeah.
well beyond the transactional nature of it.
It is funny, Alex, to think about this idea that you were following in the footsteps of like Magic Johnson, but there weren't a lot of people to emulate. And now it feels like, especially in the age of NIL and everything else, if you're not thinking about your brand, if you're not thinking about yourself as a multi-hyphenate, you're actually the outlier versus when it was when you were coming up. Do you think that's true?
Oh, yeah. I mean, look, just 25 years ago, I signed at that point the largest contract in the history of sports for 10 years, $252 million. Tom Hicks, the owner of the Texas Rangers. And before that, I had been in the league for 6 years. I was 24 years old. I entered as an 18-year-old teenager. And I became immediately public enemy number one because of that contract. And when you fast forward 25 years and you see Shohei Ohtani at 700 and he becomes literally a hero and an icon, that brings a smile to my face because there's an amazing shift that's gone on. At that point, in 2021, the team had all the power. They controlled the media. They controlled the narrative. Today, that shifted. Whether you talk about Nafisa Collier or you're talking about Anthony Edwards or Aaron Judge or Shohei Ohtani, the player has as much influence as the team, and they have become truly our partners, and we work very well with them together. It's my hope and dream that Major League Baseball gets their act together and they can work more collectively as a unit.
If not more. I mean, we're a big believer in individuals over institutions, and this is not unique to sport. This is just the way modern media is moving. And so I think, Alex, you asked the question earlier about Nafisa as a standalone versus Nafisa as a bolt-on, and I think the answer is yes. I think allowing her to develop that platform and also figuring out how it develops the brand that is the links, these two things in tandem are the superpower. Not to take over your show.
Nope.
But
Do
I
it.
actually, I have a question and a final thought.
Okay.
Alex, a question. As somebody who signed the largest deal in the history of baseball in your prime, when you look at the world of women's sports today, what has been the absolute head scratcher and how are you thinking about things differently from that person you were in that deal 25 years ago to now applying those principles to a market that, yes, 50 plus years old, but still relatively junior with, its professionalization?
Wow, that's a great question. I'd love some time to think on that a little bit more. I'm a novice in this space, and I'm really enjoying it. And I'm really collecting a lot of data and talking to a lot of smart people. But I do think that the opportunity is endless.
Totally. And I'd love to just leave you with a final thought because you did allude to your daughters. And I think, it's easy to get caught up in the short-termism of the moment that we're living in women's sports, although I like to play the long game. I'm not just in this because it's fun and it's exciting. It's all of those things, and it's a net new industry to chase. What I really want to leave your listeners with are the stakes of what we're talking about. 45% of girls are dropping out of sport in the United States by the age of 14, nearly 1 out of 2, largely due to body confidence issues. What influences body confidence issues? The media, marketing, and advertising industries, of which I'm a part of. And so when you start to think about girls who play becoming women who lead, 94% of women in the C-suite have played sports at some point, at any point in their lives, and over 50% of those collegiately. When you think about that drop-off, nearly 1 out of 2, and the social and economic impact of what is lost and potentially what could be gained as a result of keeping girls in sport and what it does for their development, that is why we're in this game. And I think one of the things that I am so impressed by and continue to be inspired by on a daily basis is the leave it better than we found it mentality of the entire women's sports community. And I think that is something that cannot be lost. Yes, the numbers will prove themselves out. Yes, there will be a lot of people who make a lot of money in this industry. But when you really think about the long tail impact of what we're talking about, we're talking GDPs. It's far greater than the short-term valuations of media rights deals we're seeing today.
All right, we're going to do a lightning round, and then we'll let you get on with the rest of your day. Laura, you've been very generous with your time. All right, 5 questions. We'll bounce it back and forth. First thing that comes to your mind. You ready?
Go for it.
All right. What's the best piece of advice you've received on deal making or business?
If you see a better way, you have an obligation to do it. And that advice came from former General Electric Vice Chair Beth Comstock, who is a longtime client and mentor of mine.
Who's your dream deal-making partner?
You.
Ooh, wow. Deals happening on the deal. My favorite thing. Which team do you want to see win a championship more than any?
I mean, I'd love to see the Liberty go back to back. Come on.
Oh, boy. Wow. Shots
One
fired.
great answer, one not so great answer. This is the deal. Here we go. What is your hype song before you go into a big meeting or negotiation?
Oh my gosh, this probably won't surprise anyone who knows me as the Jersey girl, but anything from Bruce Springsteen gets me like, there's something about,
Boss.
Baby, we were born to run.
Yeah,
We're on the
there you
move
go.
here.
Yeah. All
Love
right.
it,
That's
love
a good one. All right. What's your advice for someone listening who wants a career like yours?
Do the work. I think it's easy to pull up ChatGPT and, streamline the information, but I think truly getting in the mix and cutting your teeth are what develops some of the most competitive players I've worked with. And I think until you've lived it and you've experienced it, it's really hard to be able to navigate this industry. So do the work.
Thank you for your time.
Thank you.